Hey, what's going on YouTube? What's happening, guys? You guys have tuned in to Rules for Rebels, and I know you guys seem to enjoy these like millennial lifestyle stories. I tend to kind of enjoy them as well. So this article comes to us from the New York Times, and it's titled "Farewell Millennial Lifestyle Subsidy." Now, this is going to be a pretty long article, so I just wanted to kind of summarize it at the beginning and kind of give you guys the gist in case you don't wind up hanging out for the entire thing. But basically, what this article is kind of talking about is, for the past, I don't know what, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, millennials have had a lifestyle subsidy. And what they mean by this, like, think about how cheap Uber rides used to be versus what an Uber ride costs today. I don't know how often you guys take Uber. I don't take it that often. But typically, I always take Uber to the airport. And typically a ride from my front door to the airport is like $25, $28. Maybe during peak, it's like $35. And I was recently down in Tampa, went on vacation kind of slash shopping for a house. And my girlfriend went with me, and a buddy of mine went with me as well. And when we got out, we got off the plane, we walked out of the airport, and we go to call an Uber. And I think it was going to be $44 to go like 3 miles. And I was like, that seems fucking high. But I didn't really think too much about it, right? Because I'm in a new city. It was the middle of the afternoon. Normally, I'm not taking Ubers around in the middle of the afternoon. So I'm like, whatever. Weird, but okay. So we take the Uber. We wind up getting a rental car. So, didn't really have to take any Ubers besides that. But then I get home. I think it was a Sunday or Monday evening. And I go to call an Uber. And obviously, Uber rides from the airport are always a little bit more expensive. But again, I'm used to a $25, $28, $30, $35 ride. And my app was telling me like $72 or $74. My girlfriend's was saying $84. So, this ride that normally would cost me about $25 wound up costing me 3 times that. And what this article is kind of getting at is a lot of these, companies that kind of disrupted industries, things like Netflix streaming, things like Grubhub, things like Uber Eats, things like Uber. When these companies first launched, they were a whole new type of service. And, if you guys ever watch Shark Tank, one thing they always talk about when something is like drastically different or completely new is, it's going to take a while to educate the customer, and there's going to be kind of a learning curve that goes into that. And it's true, I don't know if you guys remember when Uber first launched, but I remember people, like, it was really a mindfuck for people, and people really had to kind of wrap their heads around. It's like, so you mean instead of riding in a smelly taxi cab where the guy's going to take me a weird route, that I'm driving in like some soccer mom's car and she's making money driving me around? Like, that's such a weird concept. And I don't know if you guys ever remember your first Uber ride, but it was kind of a weird thing at first. So you had that going on where, Uber had to kind of attract people to a new service that they weren't used to. But beyond that, you had Uber, Lyft. There were a number of other kind of lesser known startups that happened. But they want to be the Kleenex of Uber. When we talk about like tissues, you say Kleenex, but Kleenex is a specific brand, right? It's Kleenex doesn't signify tissue, but because they were, because they're the biggest name in the space, when somebody says, hey, will you hand me a Kleenex, they mean, will you hand me a tissue? And I think Uber wanted to be the same thing. When you talk about rideshare, when you talk about calling a ride, hey, call an Uber. Even if it's a Lyft that you're taking, a lot of people are going to call it an Uber. And because they wanted to kind of get that first mover advantage and kind of give themselves kind of a lead above competitors, venture capitalists poured money into companies like Uber and Grubhubs and Uber Eats. And these things were kind of subsidized. And that lasted for a long time, right? That lasted for, I forget when Uber first launched, but that lasted about 10 years. And now, people are done kind of pouring money into a company that's not profitable. Uber no longer really needs to be, super cheap. Uber has done what they set out to do, which was kind of make Uber or rideshare kind of the norm. And most people aren't going to go back to a taxi. And if you look at surveys and things like that, even when people say, what if Uber rates their rates 30%, 40%? What if Uber rates became the same as taxi rates? Well, I'd still probably take an Uber just because it's more convenient. They're all over the place and I'm not waiting. And it's just kind of become my norm in terms of my behavior. And again, both because we're coming out of the past year of the Rona, as well as, these companies eventually have to be profitable. And, Uber has kind of become the name in their industry. These companies no longer need to offer these subsidies. And, that ride that used to be $9 is now going to cost $40. That airport ride I took that used to be $25 is now going to be $82. And we're going to start seeing this across a lot of different industries. I noticed the other day maybe it was a glitch or something. I noticed my Hulu was charging my credit card like $14.99. It used to be like a $5, $5.99 service. And so I've been meaning to like look into. I don't think I got bumped up to a better package or anything like that, but a lot of these kind of like economy shared economy services are going to start going up in value. So I just kind of perused this article to kind of get the gist of what it's about, but let's give it a read. Farewell Millennial Lifestyle Subsidy. The price for Ubers, scooters, and Airbnb rentals is going up as tech companies aim for profitability. A few years ago, while on a work trip in Los Angeles, I hailed an Uber for a crosstown ride during rush hour. I knew it would be a long trip, and I steeled myself to fork over $60 or $70. Instead, the app spit out a price that made my jaw drop, just $16. Experiences like these were common during the golden era of Millennial Lifestyle Subsidy, which is what I like to call the period from roughly 2012 through early 2020, when many of the daily activities of big city 20 and 30-somethings were being quietly underwritten by Silicon Valley venture capitalists. And one thing I kind of meant to talk about before we kind of started reading this article, we're living in like a really weird period and a really weird economy, right? You can buy a new flat screen TV for what, $80? You can get yourself a $4, end table from IKEA for $4. But other things are skyrocketing. The cost of food and fuel, especially right now, is going through the roof, and even to the point where, what is it, the Consumer Pricing Index, which kind of determines inflation, the government actually removed fuel or gas and food prices from that to make inflation look like it's lower. And one of the things that's kind of funny, think about this, how often do you buy a new TV? I know some people go through TVs like candy, but you probably only need to buy a TV, every couple years, every 5 years, 7 years, maybe even 10 years if you're especially frugal or you don't need to have the newest, coolest thing. So yeah, we can get a lot of these cheap items that we only need every couple years, but things that you need on a daily basis to live your life, things like gas to get to work or to do your shopping or take your kids around, things like food, something that we need to eat every day. These things are going through the roof, but hey, you can get a $4 end table at IKEA. Actually, even the IKEA end tables have experienced inflation. I remember when I bought my first house, all my tables in the house were those $4 IKEA tables where you got the tabletop and the 4 legs screw into them. And if you were really ritzy, you could spend the extra $2 or $3 to get a different color, like black or something instead of birch. But I think even those are like $7 or $11 now. But yeah, just a really weird economy we're living in. Back to the article. For years, these subsidies allowed us to... Oh, and here's another comment, right? So, we've covered a lot of these articles about how Gen X and baby boomers were a lot wealthier at this time in their lives. When baby boomers or Gen X were 30 years old or whatever millennials are today, they owned houses at a bigger rate. They had more in savings. They had more in stocks. They were just wealthier. They were doing better in life, but they weren't getting driven around in Ubers and they weren't getting their food delivered to them. But, what kind of trade-off is that, right? Like millennials had a higher cost of college education. Home prices are through the roof. Levels of home ownership are really low among millennials, but you're kind of pacified because your food can get delivered to you, and somebody can drive you around like they're your butler. But you're still living in a 500 square foot rented apartment or your mom's house or whatever else. So the economy right now has this weird way of kind of tricking millennials into thinking they're kind of living these champagne lifestyles because they can get food delivered cheap and they can get driven around cheap. Whereas that's not something that baby boomers or Gen X had. But I don't know about you guys. I would much rather have a house, cheaper housing costs, cheaper college education than some cheap Uber rides. But for years, these subsidies allowed us to live Balenciaga lifestyles on Banana Republic budgets. Collectively, we took millions of cheap Uber rides and Lyft rides, shuttling ourselves around like bourgeois royalty while splitting the bill with those companies' investors. Sorry, drinking my coffee there. We plunged MoviePass into bankruptcy by taking advantage of its $9.95 a month all-you-can-watch movie ticket deal. We talked about that in a recent story. And took so many subsidized spin classes that ClassPass was forced to cancel its $99 a month unlimited plan. We filled graveyards with carcasses of food delivery startups, Maple Sprig, Spoon Rocket, Munchery, just by accepting their offers of underpriced gourmet meals. These companies' investors didn't set out to bankroll our decadence. They were just trying to get traction for their startups, all of which needed to attract customers quickly to establish a dominant market position, elbow out competitors, and justify their soaring valuations. So they flooded these companies with cash, which often passed on which was often passed on to users in the form of artificially low prices and generous incentives. And you know what this kind of reminds me of? You remember when Amazon came out with Kindle books? And that was kind of a weird thing, right? Everybody was reading real books before, and then the Kindle came out, and oh, this is so cool. And they kind of lured people in with making the price of Kindle books really cheap. And, you know, my girlfriend's a big reader. She kind of got into Kindle. She started downloading all of our books. And once Amazon ran all the, you know, small bookstores and stuff like that out of business, then all of a sudden they jacked up the prices of Kindle books. So now not only do you not have a local brick and mortar bookstore that you can go buy a book because they likely shut down, but now, shit, man, Kindle books actually wind up costing more than the real, you know, hard copy of the book, which is kind of crazy. My girlfriend was just kind of complaining about that the other day. She's like, fuck, man. She's like, Kindle books, you know, cost more than actually buying the book. And I see kind of the same thing happening here, right? Like, oh, I can get my food delivered really cheap. I can get driven around really cheap. And then all of a sudden, you know, one day Uber and Lyft and Grubhub and everybody else pull the plug and the costs go way up. But, you know, now people have kind of grown used to this kind of lifestyle, and they're going to continue using these services. Now users are noticing that for the first time, whether because of disappearing subsidies or merely an end of pandemic surge, their luxury habits actually carry a luxury price tag. Today, my Uber ride from Midtown to JFK cost me as much as my flight to JFK from JFK to SFO. Sunny Madra, a vice president at Ford's venture incubator, recently tweeted along a screenshot of a receipt that showed he had spent nearly $250 on a ride to the airport. Airbnb got too much dip on they chip, another Twitter user complained. No one is going to continue to pay $500 for staying in an apartment for 2 days when they can pay $300 for a hotel that has a pool, room service, free breakfast, and cleaning every day. Like, get real. You know, I love Airbnb. I kind of prefer there's kind of a different feel to taking a trip and staying at an Airbnb where you're staying in a neighborhood. You have a little bit more privacy. A lot of the Airbnbs are really kind of decked out and cool. But something I've been noticing, you know, the cost of Airbnbs is crazy. I was trying to get away this past weekend, and, you know, obviously everybody's going on vacation post beer cough, and not a lot of people are traveling internationally, so that kind of ticked up demand. But even renting like a small little cottage like near Lake Michigan or Lake Superior, they were wanting $300-400 a night. For little Airbnbs. The cleaning fees have started going through the roof. I actually was up this past week, and I wound up staying at a hotel, actually, up in Marquette, Michigan. Really cool area. It's not somewhere you're just going to stumble across. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, out of the way. But really cool city. It's a little college town. A lot of, you know, there's like 77 waterfalls in the area. You're right on Lake Superior. Cool area to go cliff jumping. So I doubt somebody from California is going to go there. But I know I have some people who watch this channel who are in the Midwest. So if you're in the Midwest and you're looking for somewhere to get away this summer, check out either Pictured Rocks, which is in Munising, just about maybe 45 minutes east of Marquette, or Marquette's a pretty cool city as well. But back to the article, some of these companies have been tightening their belts for years, but the pandemic seems to have emptied what was left of the bargain bin. The average Uber and Lyft ride costs 40% more than it did a year ago, according to Rakuten Intelligence. And food delivery apps like DoorDash and Grubhub have been steadily increasing their fees over the past year. The average daily rate of an Airbnb rental increased 35% in the first quarter of 2021 compared with the same quarter the year before, according to the company's financial filings. Part of what's happening is that the demand for these services soars. Companies that once had to compete for customers are now dealing with an overabundance of them. And I think that's really true, right? Like years ago, my parents would ask me to drive them to the airport, and I'd be like, shit, Dad, you know, you want me to take like 2.5 hours out of my time to drive you to the airport? I'll buy you a fucking Uber. It's like $25. And, it took a while to get my parents on Ubers and things like that. But now, now my mom and dad are taking Ubers around. My grandparents are ordering Instacart. So gone are the days where this is some completely new technology and they have to win people over. Now they have more customers than they need, and they actually need to raise prices to actually be profitable. Uber and Lyft have been struggling with a driver shortage, and Airbnb rates reflect surging demand for summer getaways and a shortage of available listings. Like I said, I couldn't find anything this past week, and most stuff was booked up, and those that weren't booked up had really jacked up their prices. In the past, companies might have ordered promotions or incentives to keep customers from getting sticker shock and taking their business elsewhere, but now they're either shifting subsidies to the provider side. Uber, for example, recently set up a $250 million driver stimulus fund, or doing away with them altogether. I'll confess that I gleefully took my part in this subsidized economy for years. My colleague Kara Swisher memorably called it assisted living for millennials. I got my laundry delivered by Washio, my house cleaned by Homejoy, and my car valet parked by Lux. All startups that promise cheap, revolutionary on-demand services, but shut down after failing to turn a profit. I even bought a used car through a venture-backed startup called Beepy, which offered white glove service and mysteriously lower prices, and which delivered the car to me wrapped in a giant bow like you see on TV commercials. Unsurprisingly, Beepy shut down in 2017 after burning through $150 million in venture capital. These subsidies don't always end badly for investors. Some venture-backed companies like Uber and DoorDash have been able to grit it out until their IPOs make good on their promise that investors would eventually see a return on their money. Other companies have been acquired by or able to successfully raise their prices without scaring away customers. Uber, which raised nearly $20 billion in venture capital before going public, may be the best-known example of an investor-subsidized service. During a stretch in 2015, the company was burning $1 million a week in driver and rider incentives in San Francisco alone, according to reporting by BuzzFeed News. But the clearest example of jarring pivot to profitability might be the electric scooter business. Remember scooters? Before the pandemic, you could walk down the sidewalk of a major American city without seeing one. Part of the reason they took off so quickly is that they were ludicrously cheap. Bird, the largest scooter startup, charged $1 to start a ride and then 15 cents a minute. For short trips, renting a scooter was often cheaper than taking the bus. But those fees didn't represent anything close to the true cost of a Bird ride. The scooters broke frequently and needed constant replacing, and a company was shoveling money out the door just to keep its service going. As of 2019, Bird was losing $9.66 for every $10 it made on rides, according to a recent investor presentation. That is a shocking number and the kind of sustained losses that are possible only for Silicon Valley startups with extremely patient investors. Imagine a deli that charged $10 for a sandwich whose ingredients cost $19.66, and then imagine how long that deli would stay in business. Pandemic-related losses coupled with the pressure to turn a profit forced Bird to trim its sales. It raised its prices. A Bird now costs as much as $1 plus 42 cents a minute in some cities, built more durable scooters, and revamped its fleet management system. During the second half of 2020, the company made $1.43 in profit for every $10 ride. As an urban millennial who enjoys a good bargain, I could and frequently do lament the disappearance of these subsidies, and I enjoy hearing about people who discovered even better deals than I did. Rajan Joy's essay, DoorDash and Pizza Arbitrage, about the time he realized that DoorDash was selling pizzas from his friend's restaurant for $16 while paying the restaurant $24 per pizza, and proceeded to order dozens of pizzas from the restaurant while pocketing the $8 difference. I remember that story. But it's hard to fault these investors for wanting their companies to turn a profit. At a broader level, it's probably good to find more efficient uses for capital than giving discounts to affluent urbanites. Back in 2018, I wrote the entire economy was starting to resemble MoviePass, a subscription service whose irresistible, deeply unprofitable offer of daily movie tickets for a flat $9.95 subscription fee paved a way for its decline. Companies like MoviePass, I thought, were trying to defy the laws of gravity with business models that assumed if they achieved enormous scale, they'd be able to flip a switch and start making money at some point down the line. The philosophy, which was more or less invented by Amazon, is known in big tech circles as blitzscaling. There is plenty of irrationality in the market, and some startups still burn huge piles of cash in search of growth, but these companies mature. They seem to be discovering the benefits of financial discipline. Uber lost only $108 million in the first quarter of 2021, a change partly attributable to the sale of its autonomous driving unit, a vast improvement, believe it or not, over the same quarter last year when it lost $3 billion. Both Uber and Lyft have pledged to become profitable on an adjusted basis this year. Lime, Bird's main electric scooter competitor, turned its first quarterly profit last year, and Bird, which recently filed to go public through an SPAC at a $2.3 billion valuation, has projected better economics in the years ahead. Profits are good for investors, of course, and while it's painful to pay subsidy-free prices for our extravagances, there's also certain justice to it. Hiring a private driver to shuttle you across Los Angeles during rush hour should cost more than $16 if everyone in that transaction is being treated fairly and being compensated fairly. Getting someone to clean your house, do your laundry, or deliver your dinner should be a luxury. If there's no exploitation involved, the fact that some high-end services are no longer easily affordable by the merely semi-affluent may seem like a worrying development, but it may be a sign of progress. And that's kind of interesting, right? Like if millennials who are kind of enjoying this luxury lifestyle on a beer budget are also kind of taking advantage of their peers who are also struggling millennials who are, kind of having to take these jobs because there's nothing better, or having to take these jobs to kind of fill the gap. I was going to read some of these comments, but the comments won't load. I'll link to this article down in the description box below if you guys want to check it out for yourself. If you guys enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you guys aren't subscribed to the channel, click that subscribe button down below, and I'll catch you on the next video.